Imagine a 9-year-old girl. She hears gunshots behind the wall of a Bogotá apartment building's dark stairwell. She sees her parents fall. She knows one thing. RUN. She jumps stairwells, runs across rooftops, dives into ventilation shafts, and outsmarts armed men 3 times her age, and she escapes. Not because she's lucky, but because in this little girl lives already something that does not die. This is the will to live, and this is the lust for revenge. The film, released in 2011 and titled Colombiana, begins with this scene, and it is this first scene that creates the tone for all that is to come. Colombiana is not another action movie about a hitman. It's a story about how trauma makes a person, the way dead love turns to living hate, about what happens when a little girl grows up and is not afraid of anything, or anybody. French filmmaker Olivier Megaton directed the film. It was written by Luc Besson and Robert-Marc Kamen. Zoe Saldana starred in the lead role. But what is most interesting about this film is not what is written in its official press release. The most interesting thing is where it came from, because Colombiana was not made from scratch. It was from a different film, from a film that was never produced, from an idea that had sat in a drawer in Luc Besson's desk for nearly 20 years before it became something new. But we will talk about that in detail a bit later. But first you have to understand what Colombiana is as a movie phenomenon. This is a French film, but it looks and sounds like a Hollywood blockbuster. Besson's production house, EuropaCorp, specialized in exactly this kind of cinema. It made costly, glamorous, commercial pictures in English that looked and sounded just like the products of the big American studios. And Colombiana became one of the most indicative examples of that strategy. The picture cost $40 million to make. By European independent cinema standards, this is a huge sum. At the same time, it was not a Hollywood film, nor was it shot by an American studio, and most of the major decisions were made in Paris. Nevertheless, it was seen by the global audience as an American product. This was done on purpose. Besson knew a long time ago that international audiences are more likely to look at the big screen when they see familiar faces, hear English dialogue, and feel that very pacing associated with cinema from Los Angeles. The lead character is named Cattleya. This name is no accident. The Cattleya is a rare orchid and is the national flower of Colombia. Beautiful, rare, strongly scented, and completely out of place in the most rugged of conditions. That's exactly how the heroine is. This flower was on a necklace her mother had, and it is this flower that Cataleya leaves on the corpses of her victims as a signature, not from pride, but as a sign, a signal to the man she's been looking for over 15 years. The story is set in 2 times. The first, Ijojoa, Bogotá. 9-year-old Cataleya sees her parents get murdered. Her father was employed by the crime boss Don Luis Sandoval and chose to leave the world of crime. That decision cost him his life. Cataleya flees. She reaches the American embassy and literally buys her way to the United States, handing agents a memory card containing compromising material on Don Luis. Then she travels to Chicago to find her Uncle Emilio and asks him for one thing: to train her to kill. The second timeline, 2007, 15 years on. Cataleya's a grown woman now, tall, composed, deadly. She's a professional killer. Her uncle gives her contracts, but behind every assassination is a secret scheme. Every orchid corpse is meant to get Don Luis's attention. to make him understand that someone from the past was reaching out to him across time, and that someone isn't going to stop. This is a Tulia structure containing the film as a whole. The past and present touch one another. The girl and the woman are one story. Trauma and revenge go hand in hand. And the director was able to maintain this feeling of constant suffering throughout the story. Because Cattleya, at 24, is still the little girl who died with her parents in that Bogotá apartment. But now she knows how to shoot. A word about the context of the film's release. August 2011. This was an era when audiences were used to seeing strong female characters in action movies, but still rare enough to generate interest. By then, Zoe Saldana had already starred in James Cameron's Avatar and the Star Trek reboot. They knew her name. Her physical fitness and her ability to act convincingly in genre cinema had been proven. But the part of Cataleya required a whole other level of screen presence from her. It's not simply that. Cataleya is always fighting and running and shooting. She has to look like she's in pain, even when she's not saying anything. A woman who carries a whole cemetery inside her, who smiles at her lover with one thought in mind. About the man who killed her father and mother, about his face. It is not an easy job for an actor, and the most important merits of the film, even for the most severe critics, was the convincing way in which Saldana developed this task. Colombiana was released in the United States on August 26, 2011. Its first performance in Russia took place on the 8th of September that year. The professional critics panned the film, but the audiences packed the theaters. The film made $63.5 million globally, against a production budget of $40 million. This is not a victory, but it is not a failure either. This is the story of a film that found its audience despite all the skepticism. So why is this film worth discussing today? Because Colombiana became the intersection of a number of very important stories. The story of the unmade sequel to the cult classic Leon, The Professional, how Luc Besson built his film empire. The story of Zoe Saldana, on the verge of becoming one of the most important actresses of her generation. The history of French attitude to American genre cinema. And the tale of a little girl in Bogotá who became an orchid of death. Now, a question for you. Do you remember when and where you first saw this film? What was it that really grabbed you about it? Let me know in the comments below. Next, we will talk about things that will change your view of this movie forever. And we'll begin with the man without whom Colombiana would not exist. Luc Besson. There are directors that make movies, and there are people who create worlds. Luc Besson falls into the second category. But cinema is not the beginning of his story. It starts with the sea. Luc Paul Maurice. Besson was born on March 20th, 1959, in Paris. Both of his parents were scuba diving instructors, so most of his childhood was not spent in classrooms but under the water. Greece, Yugoslavia, Caribbean Sea. Little Luc was raised in the ocean currents and the corals. And it was this freedom, this feeling of limitless space without walls and without rules, that made him an artist. He had been taught from childhood to see the world, not as a place of restrictions but as a place of movement. At 13, he knew he wanted to be a marine biologist. But at 17, a diving accident stole his ability to dive deep. The sea was shut off. Then Besson discovered the movies. If the sea was without borders, then cinema became its substitute. The screen, after all, is a window into another world as well. And the director, after all, is also a person who leads others down into the depths. He dropped out of school at 18 and moved to Los Angeles, working as an intern for 3 years on various film sets. He watched and learned and soaked. He then returned to Paris, where at the age of 23 he directed his first feature film. It was called Le Dernier Combat, The Last Battle, and it came out in 1983, a post-apocalyptic black and white movie with no dialogue whatsoever. The reviewers were amazed. The audiences were interested. One thing was clear to everybody. This guy thinks differently. Then Subway came in 1985 and The Big Blue in 1988. The real breakthrough, however, came in 1990 with the release of Besson's Nikita, known internationally as La Femme Nikita, the story of a young criminal turned into a government assassin. The film exploded the European film market. It proved that French cinema could match Hollywood action movies, not just in quality, but in spectacle and pace too. Nikita set the groundwork for an entire archetype. A hard young lady, a savage world of crime. There is something human inside this woman, something that is constantly fighting against what she is made to be. This archetype Besson would repeat again and again. Different versions, different actresses, different settings. And Cataleya of Colombiana is one of the recent and most mature incarnations of this very image. Besson directed Leon the Professional in 1994. This movie changed everything. A story of a professional hitman, Leon, who takes under his wing a 12-year-old girl, Matilda, after her family is killed. Jean Reno and Natalie Portman were one of the most unforgettable duos in the history of cinema as Leon and Matilda. The film gained critical praise worldwide and remains one of the best in Besson's career. It was with this film and the fate of its characters that the story of Colombiana would grow. But more on this separately and in details, after Leon Besson directed The Fifth Element in 1997, science fiction. Bruce Willis, Mila Jovovich, futuristic sets, insane pacing, an incredible visual creativity. The film grossed $263 million worldwide on a $90 million budget, becoming the highest-grossing French film of all time. This was the height of his directing career. After that, Besson spent less time directing and more time concentrating on his roles as producer and screenwriter. He founded EuropaCorp in 1999. This was a very specific and bold project. Besson wanted to make a European studio that would produce Hollywood independent, international-level cinema. He wanted to go head-to-head with the American majors. He succeeded to some extent in it. EuropaCorp has released more than 100 films over the years. Jason Statham's The Transporter series, the Taxi movies. The studio made colossal profits from the Liam Neeson Taken series, the Lucy series, and much, much more. But as an auteur, Besson never strayed far from a certain set of themes. He was fascinated by the lonely people who were forced to live outside the law. Women the system turned into weapons. Children who learned too soon how cruel the world can be. Heroes who want peace and get another fight. These themes run through his whole creative biography like a red thread. And when Besson, with Robert Mark Kamen, started writing the script that would eventually be called Colombiana, in the late 2000s, he returned to this milieu once again. Robert Mark Kamen needs a separate mention. He is an American screenwriter who has been working with Besson since the mid. They wrote the scripts for The Fifth Element, the series of Taxis, Taken and Colombiana. Together, their efforts have the American sense of structure and pacing that Kamen provides. Besson lends a European sense of style and psychological depth. When this combination works, the result can be very powerful. When it doesn't, it makes a lovely but empty attraction. Precisely on this line were divided the opinions in the case of Colombiana. Some said it did a brilliant job of using the Besson formula and actually delivered something emotionally compelling. Others thought the beautiful shell hid weak internal logic, and both are right in their own way. But the most interesting thing is that Besson himself has never pretended that he was doing anything more than a smart genre movie. He had never been coy about his intentions. He wanted to make a film that was professional, emotional, spectacular. And that's exactly what he did. One more thing about Besson as the producer of Colombiana is worth understanding. He didn't just sign a check and walk away. He was very involved in every aspect of the project. He had the first dream. He wrote the majority of the script. He picked the lead actress. He set the tone and the overall direction of the film. The director of the film, Olivier Megaton, was basically the one who put Besson's vision into frames. That doesn't detract from what Megaton brought to the table, but it does pinpoint where the heart of the project was. There is another detail that is seldom mentioned and which explains a lot. By the time he was working on Colombiana, Besson was already a man with a very complicated personal biography. The press dug up scandals, lawsuits, and controversial tales from his past on a regular basis. All this created a controversy around him. He remained one of the most influential figures in European cinema, but his renown was too. And in a way, Colombiana reflected that contrast. A beautiful film with a dark heart. An elegant shell that contains something harsh and uncomfortable. But it is this mixture that made his cinema recognizable. Luc Besson knows how to take violence and put it in a beautiful package better than anyone. To make death a spectacle you can't turn away from, and yet to leave enough human warmth in this spectacle so that the viewer roots for the hero, not just watching the action. That is his greatest gift, and this ability was fully revealed in Colombiana. Some films were never made, but still altered the history of cinema. And that is what the sequel to Leon is. The story of how it didn't happen and what it finally became is one of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes stories of French cinema. In the last 30 years, you have to go back as far as 1994 for the full picture. Released in theaters, Leon is an instant phenomenon. This quiet, awkward hitman and his milk bottles and houseplant win the love of the world's audiences. But Matilda, played by Natalie Portman, is no less striking. A 12-year-old girl who lost everything, found protection in a man with a gun, and now asks to be taught how to kill. She is still alive at the end of the movie. She is going to school. She puts Leon's plant into the ground. She goes on living, but Besson couldn't stop thinking about what would happen to this girl next. What did she grow up to become? What is she to do when she is 12? He started working on a script whose working title was Matilda, just after the success of Leon. It was a simple and powerful concept. Matilda is now all grown up and a professional killer. She kills those who did wrong to her and Leon. It's a story of revenge, of growing up and what professional violence does to you. But there was a serious problem at once. They needed Natalie Portman to do a film about an adult Matilda. And Natalie Portman was still a teenager in the mid. Besson chose to wait. He penned the script and shelved it. Let Portman grow up. Let her get experience, and the story will have its natural continuation. But time passed, and as it did, other problems began to mount. The first was legal and business related. The first, Leon, was a co-production with several companies, including French distributor Gaumont. And it was with Gaumont that Besson got into a real war in the late 90s. Financial disagreements, copyright disputes, different visions for future projects. Relations between Besson and Gaumont grew so tense that, in 1999, he set up his own studio, precisely to no longer depend on this company. But this was one thing. Gaumont kept certain rights to Leon's characters, to Matilda, to that whole world. A sequel was impossible without their consent, and it was not possible to do a deal with them on terms that would be acceptable. The project was stopped. On the desk was a script. The idea was there, but couldn't be made real. But at the same time, something else important was happening. Natalie Portman was aging. She was acting in other films, building her career, getting further and further away from the image of Matilda. She became an earnest artist, concerned with complex dramatic roles. The image of an adult hitwoman, even one directed by a top-tier filmmaker, no longer fit the direction she was going. Negotiations with her for a possible sequel were fruitless. Portman was courteous but chilly-tot. So, this is how the things looked by the middle of the 2000s. There is a script that Besson loves and believes in. He has a story that is close to his heart. But there is no actress to play it. According to the law, we cannot use the characters from the original movie directly, and there is no partner studio willing to invest money in a project with such complications. Then Besson made the decision that would eventually lead to Colombiana. He decided to begin again from scratch, to take the idea itself, the emotional core of the Matilda script, and transplant it into an entirely new context. A new heroine, a new origin country, a new name, a new story about childhood trauma, new foes, but the same spirit, same pain, the same insatiable hunger for vengeance. This process was explained by Olivier Megaton himself in an interview given to the American publication IndieWire in August 2011. He says he and Besson talked for a long time about how to make the material work. The first drafts of the new script still contained obvious references to Leon and Nikita, familiar things, some of the details that suggested the connection to those movies. However, after the first few readings, they realized that these references did not mesh well with the new material. They gave a feeling of derivation. The viewer would start to compare rather than experience. And Besson made the tough call to cut anything that could remind them of its predecessors. Megaton put it very precisely. Matilda would be in the way all the time if she were in this new movie, because the audience is familiar with Matilda. The audience knows how she should act, what to say, how to react. The new story demanded freedom. It needed a character who had no expectations to bring to it. Thus was born Cataleya Restrepo of Bogotá. The change from Matilda to Cataleya was more than just a name change. It was a total rewrite of the character's bio. Matilda was a white girl from New York, daughter of a small-time drug dealer. Cataleya was a dark-skinned girl from Colombia, the daughter of a man trying to escape the world of organized crime. Matilda lost her family by accident in a gang shootout. Cataleya killed her parents intentionally. They were killed by direct orders from their boss. It is a small difference, but it is fundamental to the emotional message of the story. Matilda's father was a bad man who went down a dangerous road. In Cataleya's case, her father tried to do right by her. He wanted out, and that is what killed him. Exactly, this makes the tragedy of Cataleya morally purer. No ambiguity about the victim's guilt to tarnish her revenge. Her parents were killed for desiring a normal life, and this gives the audience every right to support her on her road to retribution. Another important decision Besson made was during the script writing. He decided to turn Colombia into more than just a setting, but into a full-fledged character in the story. The country, with its own pain, its history of drug trafficking and violence, its beauty and cruelty, was to be part of the character's DNA. Cattleya is Colombian beyond her passport. She has in her something of that country. Her name, her flower, her stubbornness, her ability to survive where others give up. It is telling that the real Colombia appears only fleetingly in the film. The film was shot in Mexico City, standing in for Bogotá. It was a practical decision in terms of the logistics and safety of the film crew, but symbolic Colombia is ever present in the film. In the orchid by the name of, in the Spanish conversation, Cataleya's memories of her childhood. The country even lives in the heroine's memory when it is off-screen. 15 years had gone by since the unfilmed sequel to Leon and the finished script of Colombiana. 15 years in which the idea evolved, purified itself, and changed its face. The consequence of this is a film which is an heir to Besson's tradition and at the same time an absolutely independent work. People who knew Leon saw the shadows of their favorite film in Colombiana. For those who had not seen Leon, it seemed an original story. Well-struck balance. And Megaton was right about one thing at the same time. During the making of the film, no one on the set spoke of Leon. Nobody called Matilda's name. They were making a movie of their own. About their hurt. And that may be why the pain feels real on screen in the end. When a director's name sounds like a superhero moniker, that's a story in itself. Olivier Megaton. It's not a real name. His real name is Olivier Fontana. But sometime in his youth he decided that Fontana was not really representative of what he wanted to do, and he took a name that literally means megaton, a unit measuring the strength of a nuclear explosion. As an action movie director, this is probably the most honest artistic manifesto you can get. Olivier Megaton was born on August 6, 1965 in France. His journey to the movies was no easy one. Before becoming a director, he worked in graphic design, was involved in visual arts, and studied the language of images from different angles. That explains a lot about his direction. Megaton is a visual thinker, most of all. His frames are often composed like carefully crafted graphics. He thinks of color, line, and the rhythm of shot changes as a person raised not on dramatic theory, but on visual aesthetics with Dot. In 2002, he made his first feature film, a picture called The Red Siren in France. It was a crime thriller with Jean-Marc Barr and Asia Argento. French audiences were fairly warm to the film, but it never made it to the international market. However, this work caught the eye of Luc Besson. In Megaton, Besson found what he was looking for in his directors. A filmmaker who knows how to make dynamic, stylish, visually confident movies. Someone who won't bicker about auteur ambitions, but will execute a given vision professionally, because you have to be honest about how the EuropaCorp system works. Besson is the main architect of his projects as a producer and screenwriter. The director in this system has a very important, highly professional, but ultimately executional role. This is not an insult or a criticism. That is a correct description of the production model. Hollywood is no exception. This is the formula used to make most major genre films. The producer has the big picture in his brain. Good, the director knows it. Megaton's first. Major international project was Transporter 3, 2008. Explosive action plus French aesthetics plus Jason. The film had a worldwide gross of nearly $100 million against a budget of some $30 million. A very strong commercial result. Megaton showed he could do a big budget and an international cast. After this, Besson called him and offered him Colombiana. "I've known Luc Besson for almost 20 years, says Megaton, who got the ball rolling on the film. They were friends before they became colleagues. It was this personal trust that shaped the nature of their creative collaboration." Megaton knew Besson. He knew what Besson was trying to do at the end. He didn't need to be told at length about tone or pace or feeling. The language was identical, but Megaton was not just a dutiful tool. He made some key creative decisions that impacted how the film turned out in a big way. The first and most important of these was structural. It was Megaton who insisted the story start with Cataleya's childhood. Besson's script was for a more linear story with fewer flashbacks. Megaton persuaded Besson that the audience needed to experience the childhood trauma along with the heroine first, before they saw what she had become. Only then would her actions in adult life have the right emotional weight. That was the right call. The opening scene in Bogotá, with little Cattleya running through the slums, hiding, thinking, and surviving, became one of the most talked about sequences in the whole film. It establishes the emotional ground for the rest of the story, and this base was built thanks to the directorial decision of Megaton. The other important decision was regarding the shooting style. Megaton and cinematographer Romain, who had worked together since The Red Siren, chose to use a mobile, lively camera for the action scenes and more static, carefully composed shots for the emotional moments. The contrast was to be experienced physically by the viewer. When Cattleya moves, the world around her moves. When she remembers or mourns, the world stops. The camera becomes a mirror reflecting her innermost being. Later critics criticized Megaton for editing that, in some scenes, is too chaotic and disorienting. That's a good point. One does find Megaton tending towards very rapid shot changes in action sequences, which sometimes does deprive the viewer of spatial orientation. This is a trait that critics noted in Transporter 3, and it shows up in a couple of key episodes of Colombiana as well. Megaton acknowledged this criticism and admitted in interviews that he still struggled with pacing the edit. But there are scenes in Colombiana where Megaton's directorial prowess is on perfect display. One of the most inventively staged action sequences of that era is the early scene in the film, when the adult Cattleya breaks into a prison, dives under the water, goes through ventilation pipes, and ends up in her victim's cell. There is hardly any talking, no explanation, just body, movement, space, and a single gunshot in the silence. This is for real. Cinema without speech. Megaton followed Colombiana with Taken 2 in 2012, starring Liam Neeson. The film grossed almost $376 million worldwide, making it one of the most commercially successful films in both Megaton's and EuropaCorp's careers. It was followed by Taken 3, 2014. Colombiana then represented a transition in his career, a link between his first mega hit and even larger undertakings. It is important to understand a psychological point about how Megaton sees his role in the system of Besson. In many interviews, he has never complained about taking a back seat to Besson in name. He views it as a daily reality of his profession. It was Besson's story. Besson wrote the screenplay. Besson financed the production. The director comes in and makes a film out of it. It's a fair deal and everyone knows their part. But there is something which makes Megaton more than a simple executioner. He loves female characters on a personal level. In interviews, he has repeatedly said that he finds it most interesting to work with strong women in an action context, precisely because they are still perceived in this genre as somewhat unexpected. Male hitman is a cliché. A female assassin still has the power of surprise. And this surprise, to Megaton, is the very place where a director can put in something real. This was the central idea behind his approach to Colombiana. He didn't want to do an action movie with a female lead. He wanted to do a film about this woman and how she feels, about what it is for, on the destiny of a person who has devoted her entire life to a single goal, with no room for anything else. Did he succeed altogether? That's a question every viewer has to answer for themselves. Luc Besson knew exactly what he wanted in an actress when he thought about who should play Cattleya. Not just a pretty woman, not only a fit actress, he needed a woman where fragility and steel met, tenderness and ruthlessness. Someone that knows how to be silent, that speaks louder than any monologue. There are not many such people in Hollywood, and when the subject of Zoe Saldana came up, Besson and Megaton knew it right away. It was she. Zoe Saldana was born Zoe Saldana Nazario on June 19, 1978 in Passaic, New Jersey. Her father, Oridio Saldana, was Dominican Republic. Her mother, Asalia Nazario, is from Puerto Rico. Zoe grew up in Queens, one of New York's 5 boroughs, where Spanish is spoken on every street corner and Latin American culture is not exotic but a part of daily life. And it was in this environment that her character was forged. All this knowledge, being bilingual, dual identity, feeling like someone who belongs to several worlds at once, all this became her professional tool in the end. Her father died in a car crash when she was 9. It was a personal tragedy that changed the family's life. Her mother decided to move to the Dominican Republic where relatives lived. Zoe stayed there for the next 7 years. She went to a local school and spoke Spanish. She began studying dancing there. She enrolled in the prestigious academy Ecos Espacio de Danza, where she began to study ballet and modern choreography seriously. Saldaga's career was vital to her dancing background. It's not just a physical thing, it's a way of being in the space. A dancer knows their body thoroughly, knows how it moves, how it looks from the outside, what it can express without a single word. And when Zoe moved back to New York and started auditioning for acting jobs, that bodily knowledge gave her a huge advantage over those who entered cinema solely through theater schools. Her first major film role was in the 2001 film Center Stage, a film about students at a ballet academy. Pirates of the Caribbean 2003, The Terminal 2004, and Drumline. She was making steady progress, but no sensational breakthrough. That was until 2009, when 2 movies were released nearly simultaneously and changed everything. JJ Star Trek, in which she played Uhura, and James Cameron's Avatar, where she played Nate. Both were international cinema events. Avatar was the highest-grossing film in box office history at the time of its release, grossing nearly $2.8 billion worldwide, and Zoe Saldaña, under layers of blue CGI and performance capture, was the beating heart of that story. She showed she could make a living, believable, emotionally resonant character in a completely artificial visual setting. Besson's offer came post-Avatar to her, and this was not a coincidence. Besson looked at what Saldana had done with Netteri and saw precisely what he needed for Cattleya. A female actor in the physical realm, who knows how to be silent, speaking with her whole body, who had Latin American roots and could naturally slide into the story of a Colombian girl, and with a track record in major commercial cinema, giving the producers confidence in the project's potential at the box office. The negotiations went quickly. When Saldana read the script, she immediately found something personal in Cataleya's story. In an interview published in the Wall Street Journal in August 2011, she talked about how the story of a girl who loses her father in childhood and has to rebuild herself in a foreign country resonated with her own story. Not quite so, but emotionally, losing your father at a young age, moving to a new country, having to find yourself in a new environment. This was all in Saldaña's biography. Not in so brutal a form, of course, but the heart of the pain was known to her. Getting ready for the role was a grueling process that took several months. Saldana worked out with Hollywood fitness trainer Steve Moyer, who created a specific program for her. No one was trying to make her look muscular or physically intimidating. It was another score. Her body had to move like a professional killer's body. That's right, financially, without any wasted movements. When violence is a profession, not an adrenaline rush, every action had to be exactly as a person does it, and she trained with firearms instructors, learned tactical maneuvers and practiced the spatial movements of professional fighters. Saldana did all other action scenes without a double, except for 2 very dangerous stunts, according to the Wall Street Journal. It was a matter of principle. You can tell when an actress is doing herself what happens on screen and when she's being swapped out for a double. It is not only about technique, it is about presence. Saldana herself talked unabashedly about the bruises and bumps. She wrote on her social media that the training for Colombiana was grueling but very engaging, and that working with weapons was one of the most exciting professional experiences she ever had. She wasn't putting on an act to look tough for the camera. It was genuine enthusiasm from someone who was interested in becoming skilled at new physical things. But physical training was only half the fight. The second half was the character's inner state, and this is where the real acting challenge started. Cattleya says little of her pain. She doesn't cry. She doesn't complain. She doesn't want sympathy. She inhabits her trauma like a familiar room. She has decorated every corner of it, put everything back in its place. This is where she lives. And the actress had to portray exactly this state. Not a sudden grief, no open wounds, but emptiness. Chronic and long-lived. In an interview, Megaton said that silence was one of his main directorial tools when working with Saldana. He intended to give her time. Times when the camera just observes her face and nothing happens. And those pauses, he says, turned out to be some of the strongest moments in the final cut. Because Saldana knows how to think on the fly. It's a rare gift. All actors aren't born with it. Also worth noting is how Saldana handled the Spanish language within the film. She was brought up bilingual, but the Spanish used in Colombiana was specific. It was a Colombian accent, a different dialect from the Dominican Spanish of her youth. She worked with a dialect coach to get her pronunciation right. It is a detail most viewers will not consciously register, but it's working on a subconscious level, making it feel like it's real. The casting of Zoe Saldana as Cattleya was one of the few things about this film that had no debate whatsoever. Her performance was one of the film's chief qualities, and it was almost universally cited by critics who savaged the movie in general as its saving grace. Saldaña's acrobatic performance makes the overheated material watchable, says The Hollywood Reporter's Jordan Mintz. This is probably the best way to explain what she did for the movie. She lifted it up by pure force of presence, even when the script gave her no solid ground to stand upon. There are parts that are on screen for just a few minutes, but without them, the whole film falls apart. That's the role young Cattleya plays in Colombiana. If the audience doesn't believe this girl in the first 15 minutes, if they don't buy her fear, her resolve, her inhuman stubbornness in her escape, then everything that happens after that undermines its emotional base. The grown-up Cattleya would simply be a gorgeous woman with a gun, nothing else. So finding an actress to play young Cattleya was almost as important to the director as casting Zoe Saldana. The girl was Amandla Stenberg. She was 12 years old when she was filmed. Her feature film debut was in Colombiana, and she was so good at it that when the film opened, critics and audiences around the world were asking the same question: who is this girl and where has she been hiding? Amandla Stenberg was born on October 31st, 1998 in Los Angeles. Her mother is American, her father is Danish and has African roots. From a very young age, she began modeling and dancing, and then started auditioning for film roles. When she showed up to the Colombiana casting call, hardly anyone knew her. But in his own words, Megaton saw in her what he was looking for: a child with adult eyes, a girl who was already something of a woman, needed not only physical stamina, but the ability to be in a constant state of fear, without becoming hysterical for the scene of young Cataleya running across the Bogotá rooftops shot in Mexico City. Cataleya does not cry. She doesn't yell. She thinks. She assesses. She decides quicker than the adult men with guns chasing her have time to think. And Stenberg played it with such precision and internal truth that the sequence became one of the film's most memorable. A year after Colombiana was released, Stenberg played Rue in The Hunger Games, the first film in one of the most successful young adult franchises in movie history. Her role there was small, but very emotional. When Rue dies, the scene generated such a tsunami of grief in theaters around the world that it became its own cultural event. Stenberg's career has taken off since then. Colombiana turned out to be the very first step from which her ascent began. Now, for the rest of the cast. The cast surrounding Saldana has been chosen with evident care, and each of them contributes something special to the film. Cliff Curtis played Uncle Emilio Restrepo, the man who raised the orphaned Cataleya and trained her to be a killer. Cliff Curtis was born on July 27, 1968 in Rotorua, New Zealand. He is of Mbori descent, but has played vastly different characters of different ethnic backgrounds throughout his career. Middle Eastern barbarians, Latin American drug barons, Polynesian fighters. He's become one of Hollywood's most sought character actors because he can convincingly inhabit a variety of cultural contexts. Emilio's role was difficult in a way because this character is both a loving guardian and an accomplice. He picked up he taught her how to kill. He gives her the work. And yet he does love her. Really, Curtis, as Emilio, plays a man who accepted long ago that he chose the wrong path for his niece, but doesn't know how to turn away from it anymore. That internal conflict would have seemed unconvincing on screen. FBI agent James Ross is played by Lennie James, who hunts Cataleya and becomes an unwitting tool in her hands. Lennie James was born on October 22, 1965, in Nottingham, UK. He is one of the most respected British actors of his generation, well known in theatre as well as film and television. His face will be familiar to those who are fans of the Walking Dead series, as he played Morgan Jones. In Colombiana, James created a character that could have been just a functional plot device, another detective chasing the heroine, but he made something more of Ross. He's a smart, tired, morally complex man who knows more than he lets on. The scene where Cattleya comes to his house at night and literally holds his family hostage for information works precisely because James plays Ross not as a frightened victim, but as a man who instantly assesses the situation and makes a measured decision. Michael Vartan played Danny Delaney, the American artist who is Cattleya's lover. Vartan was born in Bougival, France, on November 27, 1968, and grew up in Los Angeles. His character is a significant dramatic element in the film. Danny is the only person in Cattleya's life who knows her as more than a killer. He only knows her as a woman, Jennifer. That's what she calls herself in their relationship. The storyline was one of the most criticized elements of the film. Some critics said it was unnecessary and underdeveloped, but it has great meaning if read correctly. Danny is the life Cattleya could have had if not for that day in Bogotá. Normal life. Love without arms. No list of targets in the future. And that's why she draws such a fine distinction between him and her real life. He mustn't know what she is. But if he knows, this last normal thing will be destroyed. Jordi Mollà was Marco, Don Luis' head enforcer, the man who personally killed Cataleya's parents. Jordi Mollà was born on July 5, 1968, in Barcelona, Spain. He's a pretty well-known guy in European cinema and sometimes shows up in American films. He made an old-school villain in Colombiana, without psychological depth, without empathy. Marco is just a tool of murder in the service of a greater evil. And Mollà played him with a languid cruelty that makes such a character really detestable. The audience is waiting for him to die from the moment he first appears on the screen. Beto Benítez himself played Don Luis Sandoval, the main antagonist of the story and a Colombian drug lord. According to the script, Don Luis is a man who made a deal with the American authorities a long time ago. CIA covers him for cooperation, and that makes him pretty much untouchable. And this untouchability is the primary engine of the plot. She can't just walk in and kill him. First, she must dismantle the protective system the state has built around him. Cynthia Adira Bonson played the role of Alicia Cattaleya's mother. Her screen time is limited to a few minutes at the start of the film, but one detail makes her image stick in the mind: the orchid necklace. Cattleya takes off this jewelry from her neck after her mother's murder, and it is this necklace which becomes the main material symbol of the whole film. A small thing with all that Cattleya has lost and all that drives her forward. This way, the ensemble cast of Colombiana is a deliberately designed system in which every character has a particular role to play. Some are love, betrayal of others, power of others, others wicked, and Cattleya is right at the center of this system. A woman tugged by all these forces, but who moves in one direction only. There are movies that have a story, and there are films that build it up like an architectural wonder. Colombiana is one of the latter. At first glance, the story appears simple. A girl loses her parents. A girl matures. A girl gets her revenge. But if you look closely, behind this apparent simplicity there is a whole system of layers, all having their own meaning. Let's begin at the beginning. 1992, Bogotá, This is an important detail that many viewers miss. The power of Colombia's drug cartels reached its peak in 1992. The Medellin cartel, led by Pablo Escobar, was at the height of power and under maximum pressure from authorities. The country was literally being torn apart between the state and the criminal underworld. It is in this context that Fabio Restrepo, Cataleya's father, is located. That Fabio is a man who worked for the drug lord Don Luis Sandoval and deserted. He collected dirt on Don Luis, encrypted it on a memory card, and planned to use it as insurance. This is a classic crime genre plot device. Information as a weapon. But the filmmakers use it more cleverly than it appears at first, because it is this memory card that is Cataleya's passport for a new life. Her father had left her no money, no weapons, no connections. He gave her information, and this is what saves her. It is one of the most sophisticated scenes in the entire film at the American embassy. Then a 9-year-old girl, recently orphaned, appears at the embassy gates. She does not weep. She takes out the memory card she swallowed and threw up to keep it safe when she escaped. She places it before the American diplomat and glances up at him. I mean, it's not like I'm gonna be like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna go out and get some groceries, and then go out and get some groceries, only for the appearance. And the diplomat knows. This girl sure knows her stuff. She's not a victim asking for assistance. She's a partner with a deal. It's an important moment in understanding the whole character of Cattleya. She's been a strategic thinker since she was 9. She does not respond emotionally to the world. She studies it and finds leverage points. This is a trait that later makes her such an effective assassin. And this is the trait that is her greatest loss as a human. Because a person who always thinks strategy slowly forgets to feel. Fast forward 15 years. 2007. The grown-up Cattleya is a hitman for Uncle Emilio. But every contract killing has an agenda of her own. She draws an orchid in lipstick on the bodies of her victims. This is a post. Every orchid tells you, Don Luis, I am alive. I'm coming for you. Brace yourself. This storyline works on many levels at once. First, it moves the central story forward. The FBI takes notice of the orchids, which is another hurdle for Cattleya. Secondly, the psychological characteristic of the heroine. She doesn't kill. She talks through murder. It is the only language she has to talk to the world of the past. Thirdly, the orchid is a symbol of identity. Every orchid that is painted says, I remember who I am. I remember where I'm from. I haven't turned into someone else. The structure of the film's narrative is based on the principle of a tightening noose. At first, Cattleya is light years away from her goal. The CIA, time, Don Luis, is protected by the cartel. He thinks the girl's dead. He thinks he is safe. The distance is lessened in each succeeding episode. Cattleya kills one of his men. Then another one. The orchids grow. The net tightens. Y Don Luis comienza a sentir que alguien viene por él, a través de los años y a través de los cuerpos. At the same time, a second story arises. FBI agent James Ross is investigating the orchid murders. He is shrewd, seasoned, and methodical. He does the jigsaw puzzle. One answer, another. A photo of a woman asleep, which her lover was silly enough to show to a friend. And suddenly Ross has a face. The face of a murderer. Now the hunt is coming from both sides. Don Luis is searching for Cattleya. The FBI is on Cattleya's trail. Only Cattleya herself knows where that is. The third storyline is one of Uncle Emilio and his family. Emilio knows what's going on. He knows where Cattleya is headed, and he is scared. Not for her, for his family. If Don Luis discovers that his niece is the cause of the orchids, his men will come to his house. This arc brings up the idea of collective responsibility. Cattleya is messing with the lives of people that she herself says she is not willing to protect. It's a hard admission. She loved her uncle, but her goal is larger than his security, and this coldness is one of the darkest things about her. This story arc comes to a head in the middle of the movie. Emilio is found by Don Luis's men, and his family is all murdered. This is where the film temperature changes. But before now, it was all slick, stylish action movie stuff. When Emilio's family die, the story changes. There's no room for distance anymore. Cattleya has paid a heavy price for her revenge. Not with money, not in the blood of the enemies, but in the blood of those she loved. This is the boldest narrative leap the filmmakers take. They don't give Cattleya time to stop and think. She doesn't sit around in the dark and wonder if her goal was worth the cost. She continues, even quicker, even more fiercely, because stopping means thinking, and it's too much to think in this moment. Movement is her only way. Not to break. One of the most interesting moments of the movie is the structure of the meeting between Cat and Agent Ross at his house at night. Instead of running from the FBI, she approaches him. She is in control of the situation. She explains what is happening to him. She threatens his family, and she makes him an instrument in her own hands. It is more than just a plot twist. It's a testament to how in tune Cattleya is with systems of power and how to game them. She turns the very logic the state uses against her. On the state machine itself, Ross calls CIA agent Steve Richard, who is protecting Don Luis. Cattleya threatens Richard's family. And Richard, a man who sold out the law to work with a drug trafficker, cracks under pressure and gives up Don Luis's location. It's a moment of bitterness and honesty. Ultimately, the guys who betrayed the law for money are proved to be weaker than the girl they indirectly destroyed so many years ago. The execution of Don Luis is deliberately unconventional. Cattleya does not kill him by her own hand. She doesn't look him in the eye and doesn't say anything. She uses specially trained dogs that she had hidden in his car. Don Luis Diez, a miserable, terrifying death, devoid of dignity. No last word. This is a conscious choice by the creators. The bad guy doesn't get a beautiful death. He deserves the same random brutality he inflicted on others. The film ends on a note of ambiguity. Cattleya walks out. She continues with her life. But the emotional impact of this conclusion, she got what she was after. Don Luis is no more. Marco is dead. All the guilty have been sent down. But Emilio's family is dead as well. Danny, her lover, is lost and the FBI interrogated him. Her secret life is over. Now she is alone again. Back in motion. Homeless again. Victory here feels like another form of defeat. And in this bitter duality of the ending is contained the most honest message of the whole film. Watching Colombiana, you get the feeling that the film exists in several worlds at one time. The bright tropical poverty at the beginning, oppressive. The cold grey urban geometry in the middle. The elegant European feel in some of the scenes. And all this is stitched together so seamlessly that most viewers never even realize they are looking at completely different countries. cities and continents that have never existed together in real geography. Filming for Colombiana began in August 2010. The process took several months and involved 4 major locations: Chicago, Illinois; New Orleans, Louisiana; Mexico City, Mexico; and France. Each of these places carried their own visual and emotional weight. Together they created the composite world that is the setting for Cataleya's story. We'll start with the most glaring discrepancy, rarely discussed, but essential to understanding the film's production choices. The first 15 minutes of the film are set in Bogotá, the capital of Colombia, but it was not filmed there. Scenes set in the Colombian capital were shot in Mexico City. This decision was dictated by several factors: logistics, safety of the crew, the cost of production in various countries, and the availability of the required visual environment. Mexico City was the perfect replacement. The city was densely built up, old residential blocks with their peeling plaster, narrow streets, the rooftops so close you could step between them. All of this generated the necessary atmosphere of a Latin American metropolis, where life is going on over every square meter, and the line between poverty and danger is so transparent that it becomes invisible. The director needed the visual texture of Mexico City for the opening sequences of the film. One detail that observant viewers will note is telling. In a number of frames shot in Mexico City, a number of elements of urban architecture are visible in the background that betray the location's Mexican origin. Specific street signs that are specific to Mexico City, architectural features that are not typical of Bogotá. Most of the viewers miss these details, but anyone who has studied both cities on film will see right through the inconsistency. These are still the production trade-offs that any major international project has to work with. Chicago. This is where young Cattleya escapes from Colombia. Here she meets Uncle Emilio. This is where most of her adult life is lived. Chicago was no random choice. It is a city with deep historic ties to the Latin American immigrant community. There have been Puerto Rican and Mexican diasporas in Chicago for generations. The city accepts, as if it were the most natural thing, the tale of a Latin American girl who comes with no papers and no future. Mexico City gave the film a totally different temperature than Chicago. Concrete gray, broad streets, that cold light that's characteristic of the Midwest. Small person looks small. Architectural monumentality. In this visual world is where young Cattleya becomes adult Cattleya. The city eats her childhood and gives her back a calling. Cinematographer Romain Lacabus shot the Chicago scenes with a constant sense of verticality. Tall buildings protruding out of frame, the little figure of a person below. The city as a jail, delicious but unachievable. One such reworld site was Union Station in Chicago, the city's main railroad terminal at 225 South Canal Street. The archetypal sense of American power and facelessness is embodied in this building with its grand columns and massive central hall. It shows up in several scenes in the movie and is a symbol each time. The state machine, a system that grinds people down without even knowing. The crew shot several major action sequences in New Orleans. This city was chosen for practical reasons, with its mix of cultures, historic buildings, and wide streets. And Louisiana had some really good tax breaks for film shoots at the time, which dropped prices considerably. For the same reason, many major American and international projects of that era were filmed in part in New Orleans. The scene in which Cattleya crashes her vehicle into a police car was shot in the Fat City neighborhood. a suburb of New Orleans. Sharp-eyed viewers noticed an interesting detail in one shot of this sequence. The sign on the gas station in the background literally changes within seconds. First there is a Circle K sign on the same building, then it says Brothers. This was because the gas station changed ownership during the time the film was being shot. The Brothers chain had bought out the Circle K franchise and was changing signs. The editors didn't catch the discrepancy, and it made it to the final cut. In the same New Orleans sequence, Uncle Larry's bar was a real bar in Fat City at the time of the shoot. It closed then, and now another business occupies the site. That's one of those tiny facts that over time transforms real-world film locations into bizarre historical documents. The film keeps the look of places that are no longer there. French, the action moves to Europe for a couple of scenes. That's where part of the story of CIA agent Steve Richard and the final resting place of Don Luis takes place. The European scenes were filmed in France, which was perfectly natural, being a French production company. EuropaCorp had the contacts and the infrastructure to film in the French locations it needed. And then the visual fabric of the film was embroidered with a European environment, which gave another geopolitical dimension to the story. The action is not limited to Latin America and the US. It has the whole Atlantic world as its scope. The film's production designer was Patrick Durand. His task was to create a single visual space out of all these different places. This required a number of basic decisions. First, each place had to keep its own particular atmosphere. Mexico City could not be like Chicago. Chicago was not supposed to look like New Orleans. This diversity is the visual strength of the film. Cattleya is a person without a single home, and for that simple reason, her world is so rich and varied. Secondly, the film had to have its own visual identity, despite the diversity. Durand and cinematographer Le Corbus achieved this by manipulating color and light. Cold, bluish tones in the scenes of Chicago. Warm, almost suffocating ochre in the Mexican sequences. Cattleya's assassination missions in deep night blues, and infrequent moments of warm human light in her life with Danny. This color coding is intuitive, even to those who are not familiar with the language of cinematography. Warm colors are associated with the past, roots, and what was lost. The cold colors represent the present, her job, and the city that became her second home without her consent. And with this color code, the whole emotional map of the character is encrypted. Design of Cataleya's apartment needs to be addressed. The story informs us that she lives in Chicago in a modest, almost ascetic dwelling. No personal effects. Sorry, no photos. No indication of who she is. But there's a whole arsenal under the floorboards. Weapons, tools, papers. The apartment is not a home. It is a facade. She doesn't live there. She is hiding there. And that design choice tells us a lot more about what kind of person the heroine is than any dialogue in the film. There is one question that every action movie viewer asks themselves, even if it is subconscious. Is that her or not? Because there is a physical difference between an actress actually doing what we see on screen and an actress being replaced by a stunt double. Even if the editing is perfect, even when makeup and lighting conceal the switch, the viewer feels its presence or lack thereof. And that's why Zoe Saldana's decision to do most of her own stunts became a big factor in defining the physical credibility of the film. She rejected a stunt double for all but the two most technically dangerous sequences. According to data she shared in pre-release interviews, she did all the rest by herself. Jumping, dropping, fight, gunplay, crawling through tight ventilation ducts, jumping into water. This is a huge amount of physical work, which starts long before the first day of shooting, and ends long after the last dot. The preparations for the physical side of the role were going on at several fronts at the same time. The first was, as noted, general physical conditioning with trainer Steve Moyer. The second was just as important, working with a fight choreographer and stunt coordinator. For Colombiana, they brought in an expert for the movement style that suited the character. Cattleya is not a boxer or a wrestler. She does not do flashy mid-air kicks. Her fighting style is functional and economical, based on space awareness and surprise. She doesn't kill with raw power, but with precision. That was a conscious decision. Most of the action films at the time had female leads that fought like ballet dancers, who deliver beautiful and high kicks that look great but are not realistic in real combat, or like small tanks, who literally bulldoze their opponent no matter the weight and size difference. Megaton consciously avoided clichés. Cataleya fights differently in his movie. She utilizes her environment. She avoids direct confrontation if she can. She gets her opponent when her opponent least expects it. It's the style of a mind that runs faster than her fists. And the firearms training is quite another discussion. Cataleya uses different weapons in different scenes. And it always looks like the work of someone for whom a gun is just a tool of the trade. No frills, no wasted motion, hold, aim, fire. This is only done after hours of drilling with a firearm instructor. Muscle memory has to be drilled so deep that the actress doesn't have to think about how to hold the gun on set. She just sort of holds it there in a number of interviews. Saldana said that one of the most surprising pleasures of prep was training with firearms. She said it was a little meditative. Repeat the same motion over and over and over again until your body remembers it forever. It's a bit like the ballet training she had as a child. Same reasoning. The same exercise. Another tool. Let us now consider some particular sequences and their staging and filming. The opening chase in Mexico City, where young Cataleya runs from Don Luis' men across rooftops and alleyways, is arguably the most physically intense scene in the entire film. Saldana wasn't the main player here. Amandla Stenberg was. That only made the stunt coordinator's job that much harder. Working on physically dangerous shoots with a child means constantly balancing between spectacle and safety. Stenberg's specially trained stunt double did most of the jumps and more dangerous moves in the sequence. But the close-ups of the girl's face, the look in her eyes, her breathing, those were shot with the real Amandla. And this marriage of the double's technical execution with the actress's emotional contribution is what makes the presence seamless throughout the scene. The viewer feels it is the same girl because of the continuity of her internal state across the cuts. The prison infiltration scene at the top of the grown-up timeline is a minimalist staging wonder. Cattleya jumps into an outdoor swimming pool near the prison compound, swims underwater to a ventilation intake, shimmies up tight metal pipes, and ends up in her victim's cell. All of it shot with almost no visible cuts at critical moments. Long takes, continuous, following the body of Saldana in motion. Special preparations were needed for the underwater scene. Saldana practiced holding her breath and working in tight spaces underwater. This is no little skill. Small, enclosed aquatic environments create severe psychological pressure even for experienced swimmers. Lucubus, the director of photography, followed the actress and shot the sequence with an underwater camera. The blue light of the water, the air bubbles, and the slow, precise movement of her body made one of the most beautiful and atmospheric scenes in the entire film. The episode Underwater was followed by sequences shot in the narrow ventilation shafts on specially built sets. This was the work of production designer Patrick Durand and his team. The metal tunnels were built with the actress's real body measurements in mind, and yet they were still narrow enough to physically feel claustrophobic. Saldana wriggled, crawled, literally pushed herself through the metal. She proudly mentioned her bruises earned here. Among other places, the final action sequence in which Cattleya destroys Don Luce's security force is the most technically criticized part of the film. This is where Megaton's editing falls apart too much. The cuts are so fast that sometimes the spatial logic of the action is difficult to follow. Where is who? Where the shots are coming from? Where Cattleya is headed? This is just the fault in Megaton's directing style I mentioned before. Sometimes the desire for dynamism works against clarity, and yet, in this last wild skirmish, there is one moment of complete purity. When after the last shot, Cataleya stops and stands still in the middle of the corpses. The camera moves back. She is small in a big place. She was on her own. On our own, it's not a victory, it is tiredness. And Saldana conveys this state without a single word, only by her posture and the direction of her gaze. Also, the scenes with the dogs that Cattleya releases against Don Luis as weapons must be mentioned. This was one of the most technically demanding parts of the shoot. It's always unpredictable working with trained animals on set. Each walk with the dogs required a great deal of preparation and many rehearsals. During the filming of these sequences, a crew member was also a committed animal handler. The physical execution in Colombiana is one of the most consistently realized elements of the film in the end. Yes, one can criticize the editing in some scenes. Yes, some of the moments defy the laws of physics, but that's genre cinema. But one cannot deny the primal sense of bodily authenticity that Saldaña's screen presence, and there she is, really, and you can feel it in each scene. A good genre film is enjoyable. A very good genre film entertains, and it says something true. Colombiana sits somewhere between these two definitions, closer to the latter than it is often given credit for. Because beneath the slick action movie about a female assassin are layers of meaning that reveal themselves, bit by bit, under closer inspection. And it all starts with a flower. The Cattleya orchid is Colombia's national flower. This is not artist fiction. This is not an arbitrary choice by the screenwriters. The Cattleya, or Cattleya, as it's pronounced in the film, is a real flower, officially adopted by Colombia as its national flower in 1936. It is a rare and precious flower with a strong fragrance, which grows in inaccessible places, on cliffs and in high-altitude forests. It appears beautiful and delicate, but can flourish in conditions that would kill most other plants. Good authorial genius naming the protagonist after it. For every quality of the flower is a quality of the character. Beauty hiding resilience. A rare thing that makes her one of a kind. The ability to survive where others die. And most importantly, a flower that grows not where it is comfortable, but wherever it can take root. Cattleya didn't pick her life. Her life blossomed from the soil fate dealt her, from pain, into seclusion, of aggression, and from all this grew something rare and beautiful in its own way, but deadly. The mother's flower necklace is the film's primary material symbol. It was the only personal item Cattleya had left. Everything else of her past life was rubbed out. Her parents are deceased. She still lives in some other country. The minute the shooting started, her childhood was over. But the necklace is there. At the moment of death, it is passed from mother to daughter. The only living link between who Cattleya was and who she is now. Psychology calls the term transitional object. It's a memento from a deceased loved one that allows them to keep an internal connection to that person after they've died. That's precisely how the necklace functions in the film. When Cattleya wears it, she isn't just wearing it. She's igniting a memory. She goes back to that apartment in Bogotá. Again, she heard her mother's voice, and this return is what at once feeds and destroys her. This same symbol is transformed into the lipstick with which the orchid Cataleya paints her victims. What begins as a tender family flower becomes a killer's signature. The metamorphosis is symbolic of what happened to the heroine herself. Something soft and personal had been cut out of her and turned into a weapon. Her love for her parents became a tool of death. Her mother's memory became a siren warning for her enemies. It is one of the most psychologically astute things in the entire film. This inversion of the symbol. Then there's the identity question. Cattleya has a third name. She is Jennifer to her lover, Danny. First, she is not there for FBI agent Ross. Then, she is just a faceless profile in a database. To Uncle Emilio, she is a niece and a professional tool. To Don Luis, she's dead first, then a faceless threat. Cattleya is only for herself as an individual, and that is the greatest tragedy of all for her. This theme, in one way or another, is present in all of Besson's work. His heroines are often people without proper names. Nikita had several different names. Lulu in The Fifth Element was the last of a lost race, and her real name had no equivalent in any living language. Cataleya carries on this tradition. She is a person whose true self is so deeply buried that sometimes it seems to be non-existent. But here is the paradox. Her real signature is the orchid she leaves on all. But not Jennifer. Not the anonymous assassin in the FBI file. But Cattleya, daughter of Fabio and Alicia Restrepo, the girl with her mother's necklace. Drawing each orchid is an act of self-assertion. I am here. I can remember my name. I will not let you forget what you have done. Another semantic layer of the film, which has been widely analyzed by cinema scholars, is the theme of immigration and belonging. Cattleya is the quintessential immigrant, coming to America not by choice but out of need. She never thought she'd live in Chicago, and there she was, because life chose for her. She never belonged. She didn't become American. She lives in America for temporary refuge, carrying in her the full weight of where she came from. In a 2012 essay in Senses of Cinema, British film scholar David Martin-Jones examines Colombiana exactly through the lens of geopolitics and immigration. He saw that the main conflict has a very specific blueprint. A person from the global south arrives in the affluent, corrupt global north and causes chaos. It turns the standard Hollywood script on its head, where the threat is always below and the population is rescued from above. In Colombiana, it is the woman from a poor Latin American country who takes down the system supported by American intelligence agencies. In this context, the character of CIA agent Steve Richard, who protects the drug lord in return for cooperation, is politically charged. He's not a supporting villain. He is a manifestation of the systemic corruption of the American state machine, a state that should uphold the law but uses it for its own advantage. And it is this very state that Cattleya finally forces to work for her when she threatens Richard's family. She turns the very same logic of blackmail and coercion that he uses in his work against him. A mirror. The system takes back what it gave the world. Perhaps the most profound theme running through the film is that of childhood and its indelibility. Colombiana poses a question it never articulates, but that echoes in every scene. Can you outgrow childhood trauma, or does it stay with you for life? Cattleya, as an adult, is functionally victorious. She is a pro. She is very smart. She is physically perfect. But inside her is still that 9-year-old girl outside the gates of the American embassy holding a memory card. The girl still waiting for it to be safe enough to come to a stop. The relationship with Danny is the impossibility of ever fully growing up. He loves her. She's around here, but she is never her true self to him. This is not just a precaution. It's a psychological defense mechanism. And if he finds out the truth, Jennifer is gone. And only Jennifer Cattleya knows how to chill, and knows how to laugh, who sometimes forgets the hit list. Cattleya doesn't want to lose that part of herself. Finally, there is the theme of the price of vengeance. The film is not a moralizer. It does not preach against revenge, but it really shows the price. Emilio's family are dead. Danny was interrogated by the FBI and defeated by her. Cataleya is running again, homeless again, nameless again. Don Luis is blown to smithereens, but the hollow inside the heroine is not gone, or maybe grown even more, because she'd spent her whole life working for this goal, and now the goal was gone. What happens to a person when the only reason they existed disappears? In the film, this question is not answered, but is left hanging in the air. Cataleya boards a bus and drives away. The screen goes black, and the viewer is left to ponder that question alone. This is the most honest ending the creators could have conceived. Some movies you remember by the eyes. There are movies you hear and remember. There are also movies where the visual and auditory elements are so intertwined that you can't separate them when you recall them. Colombiana falls into the latter category. The music and imagery function as one organism, engendering that special feeling that viewers so often try to describe with a single word. Atmosphere. Let's begin with the music. The film's composer was Nathaniel Meshally, a French musician who had already shown his worth in genre cinema. Meshally isn't a marquee name in film composition. He's not in the same league as Hans Zimmer or Ennio Morricone, but this actually played to the film's advantage. Meshally approached the task unencumbered by great expectations, but with a very clear idea of what this particular story demanded. At its heart, Colombiana is built on a contradiction. On the other hand, it's a tune with a Latin American flavor, warm, lyrical, earth-rooted, as is the heroine herself. But this melody is wrapped in cold electronic textures, in an industrial pulse, in the rhythms of a modern metropolis, the warmth of yesterday, the chill of today, roots and asphalt. Here is where the entire emotional world of Cataleya exists. Meshally found the exact sound formula. The orchestral part of the score is used mainly in scenes of childhood and memory. When we see young Cataleya in Bogotá, when adult Cataleya mentally returns to her parents, when the orchid appears on screen as a symbol of loss, the music becomes organic and warm. Strings, languid melody lines, a noise like the effort of a person fighting back tears. The electronic elements dominate the action sequences and the tracking and hunting scenes. A rhythmic course, almost mechanical beat. This is the music of a man on the job. Someone who has switched off their emotions and gone into purely functional mode. That is a very smart description. The viewer literally hears Cattleya alternate between her two selves. Between the girl from Bogotá and the assassin from Chicago. One of the most controversial musical choices in the film is the use of silence. Megaton and Messily agreed that some key sequences would be almost completely without music. The prison infiltration scene I mentioned earlier is a prime example. There is hardly any music here, only the sound of water, the scratch of metal, the scrape of ventilation pipes, Cattleya's breath, and a silence that roars louder than any orchestra. This choice is a hard punch because the rest of the film is so full of sound. The sudden loss of sound is a physical shock in its absence. Now, for the camera work. Romain Lecourbe's, director of photography of Colombiana, is a French cinematographer who built his career mostly in European independent cinema. He worked with Megaton, starting on The Red Siren and continuing through Transporter 3. By the time they worked on Colombiana, they were a creative team who were already established and knew each other. Instinctively, Lecourbe's worked on this project with a few key principles of cinema in mind. The first was on close-ups. He filmed Saldaña's face a lot and really close up. It's not just for the display of her beauty, though that's certainly evident, but because her face is the main tool the actress uses in this role. Cattleya doesn't speak much. She thinks a lot and internalizes a lot. The camera pushes in tight to let the audience see this internal machinery. Any movement of an eyebrow, every sparkle in her eye. Behind them, a switch is thrown every second. The second main principle was about the relationship between the body and space. Lecourbe deliberately played back and forth between two kinds of framing. Cattleya dominates the screen in several shots. Her body fills the space and you can almost feel her physical presence tactilely. In others, she is a point in a great ocean, a big city, a long hallway, an infinity of water, and she's out there all alone and tiny. It is this switching which creates the constant sense of duality. Cattleya is at once the most dangerous person in the room, and the loneliest person on earth. The lighting of the film deserves a mention on its own. Specific lighting motifs recur throughout the film, establishing visual light motifs employed by The first one is under. The key light hits from below or the side in many scenes where Cattleya is in danger or tension, and the shadows make her face both beautiful and scary. It's almost a theatrical device. Mystery, menace, and all things that are to be hidden from the daylight have, in the past, been suggested by lighting from below. The second lighting motif relates to the color blue. Blue appears in a very large number of scenes, especially at night. A window to a street with a blue glow, the blue glow of computer screens, the blue of the pool water, blue shadows in the hallways. Blue has some persistent associations in Western visual traditions: coldness, isolation, melancholy, professional detachment. Everything that characterizes Cattleya's nocturnal, occupational life. Another visual element, not necessarily immediately obvious to the eye, but present in almost every scene, is glass, windows, mirrors. Glass partitions. Lecourbe shot a lot of scenes through glass or with reflected action in it. That is not an accident. Glass is a sign of barriers. Cattleya has always been looking at the world through something. Out a car window, through a window of another man's house, through a sniper's scope. She is always the observer, always a little bit outside, even when she is physically inside. She is never in the world she looks at. She always looks at it through an insurmountable, transparent barrier. The editing of the film needs to be given special attention. Colombiana was edited by Camille Delamere, a French editor who moved on to directing. Delamere had collaborated on several projects with Megaton and knew his style well. His editing concept for Colombiana was contrasts of pace. Dramatic scenes were cut slowly to allow for pauses and breath. Action sequences were cut frantically, sometimes too fast. Now this is the criticism that was hurled at the final product. But one editing choice in the film works perfectly. The parallel work between young Cattleya and adult Cattleya. The film alternates between the two timelines at several points, not via direct flashbacks, but via parallel action. The little girl is running. Somewhere else, the grown woman dances to the same rhythm. The girl is hiding. The woman is hidden. One movement, one logic, one soul in two bodies. This is the most visual testament to eloquence in the film. Cataleya is the same thing. She is only physically grown. There's still a little girl in her, and she didn't go anywhere. To judge Colombiana as merely a visual and auditory artifact, without considering the narrative grievances that critics rightly point out, is to see a work of exceptionally high professional quality. Even when the story stumbles, Le Courbes, Mascioli, and Delamere have created a world that is a joy to inhabit. That is a rare gift, and it's the reason why the film is still being watched today. Not for the story, except for the way it looks and sounds. When a film arrives in theaters, a second life starts. The one not under the creator's control. Critics review things. Audiences vote with their wallets and their time. Advocacy groups respond. Aggregator algorithms crunch numbers into scores. And all this adds up to a reputation for the film, which sometimes matches its actual qualities, and sometimes not at all. For Colombiana, the gap between what the critics thought and what the audience thought was one of the biggest mismatches in genre movies of that time. The figures first. Colombiana opened in 2,614 theaters across America. On August 26, 2011. Wide release. The studio felt they had a commercial property and they didn't sit on it. Opening weekend, the picture grossed $10,408,000, landing in second place at the domestic box office. The top spot that week was held by The Help in its second week, which pulled in just over $14 million. That particular weekend was broadly considered one of the weakest for box office gross in all of 2011, which somewhat skews the perspective over its entire run in the US and Canada. Colombiana grossed $36,665,854. The international release added another $26,800,000. Ultimately, the global gross hit $63.5 million against a production budget of $40 million. The movie came out even, not victorious, but steady. EuropaCorp had a profit, which meant the project could be a commercial success, if not a smash success. A crucial point often missed when analyzing box office. Production budgets and total studio costs are not the same thing. But the $40 million production budget doesn't include marketing and distribution costs, which for a film of this scale amounted to another $20 million or more. So the real break-even point for Colombiana was much higher than doubling the production budget. The movie stepped over that line, but it didn't have much runway to spare. This is the reason why talk of a sequel for years, though with occasional announcements, never really came to anything concrete. CinemaScore gave it a solid A from audiences. Very strong metric. Cinema score polls real moviegoers in theaters on opening night and the first weekend, and their response to Colombiana was much more enthusiastic than that of the professional critics. And people who bought a ticket got exactly what they came for and went away happy. What makes the film's legacy so distinctive is this gap between the critical and audience reception. Now, as for the critics, the film holds a 28% positive rating on review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, based on 106 reviews. The average score is 4.9 out of 10. The site's critical consensus reads, "Zoe Saldana has the chops, but is let down by erratic and sloppy directing." Metacritic gave the film a score of 45 out of 100, based on 22 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. The audience rating on IMDb is 6.7 out of 10, which underscores the gulf between the professionals and the average moviegoer. What exactly did reviewers complain about? Such complaints can be traced to a number of common complaints in reviews of the day. The first and most common was against the logic of the story. Many reviewers cited plot holes which become obvious on closer examination. How does one woman, without state support, stay under the FBI's radar for years and rack up more than 20 confirmed hits? How does she all by herself take out a whole security force at a heavily guarded target? Realism was sacrificed to the altar of spectacle, and critics took notice. The second complaint was about the editing of the final action sequences. Variety critic Jordan Mincer, however, praised Saldana and certain scenes, but noted that some of the action set pieces were cut so chaotically that they lost their spatial coherence. The viewer can no longer keep track of who is where and what is happening. This isn't building tension, it's diffusing it. The third complaint was more subtle. Some critics said the film's emotional arc, the story of a traumatized woman, the story of isolation and the impossibility of normal life, was introduced but never fully realized. The film seems to want to go deeper psychologically, but too often falls prey to the entertainment mode before the emotion has a chance to really connect with the audience. Good point. Colombiana doubles down on two genre strategies and struggles to maintain a steady balance. One of the good reviews is from Betsy Sharkey at the Los Angeles Times. She called the film a lively B-movie in the best sense of the phrase, slotting Colombiana into the long line of Besson's tales of women broken by the system but not broken by it. The film is what it wants to be: smart, muscular, late summer entertainment. Christy Lemire of the Associated Press wrote, "It's self-aware and therefore honest. Saldaña doesn't get enough room to really act, but her fighting skills bloom exactly where they need to," wrote Claudia Puig of USA Today. Now for the main controversy that accompanied the release. Por Colombia, a non-profit that promotes a positive image of Colombia abroad, publicly denounced the film. Carlos Macias, president of the organization, said Colombiana perpetuates the stereotype of Colombia as a land of drugs and violence, damaging the country's international image. He called the film proof of a total absence of creative imagination in Hollywood, although technically, Colombiana is not a Hollywood product. The backlash got a lot of play in the American media, in part because Zoe Saldana's reaction was surprisingly snarky. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, she shot back, "Shame on you. I don't know how to respond to stupid and uneducated comments, but I'm not a stupid person." The quote instantly went viral across multiple outlets. Some commended her honesty. Others said the reaction was too aggressive for a fight with a non-profit. Por Colombia's complaints were not without substance. The film actually depicts Colombia only in terms of drug trafficking and cartel violence. The Bogotá that opens the movie is poor neighborhoods, gunmen, and terror. The Colombian characters are neatly divided into victims and criminals. The film gives no other dimensions of Colombian life. Good observation. But Colombiana never pretended to be a social documentary on the real Colombia. It is a genre painting with a geographical and cultural context. The absurdity of the debate was that the organization's demands were out of step with the actual goals of the film. Film scholar David Martin Jones examined the same dilemma in more nuanced terms. His essay, In Senses of Cinema, suggested a different reading of the film, not as stereotyping of Colombia, but as a story of the global South, embodied in one woman, hitting back at a corrupt global North. In this reading, Cattleya is not a victim of her country, but the avenger of it. In conclusion, Colombiana was released in cinemas at the end of summer 2011. The critics turned up their noses at it. The audience responded warmly. It was not a smash hit, but did make its budget back. It caused one actual public row and gained itself a bit more attention from the media. In the end, Colombiana was exactly what it should have been. A solid genre flick with a great lead actress. A movie that people who saw it will remember, and people who didn't will forget. Some movies are deafeningly loud at the beginning and gone a year later. Some movies sneak through the theaters only to get a second life 10 years later. Colombiana is in the latter category. In 2011, it wasn't a cultural milestone, but it has not gone away. It lives on in streaming catalogs, recommendation lists, conversations about female-led action cinema, and the career biographies of the actors and directors involved. A quiet, resilient life for a film that was more necessary than it seemed at first. The first thing any conversation about Colombiana's legacy must start with is the most glaring context. 2011 was a time when a female lead in an action movie was still something of a marketing risk. An exception to the rule. An experiment, not the default. Most studios that greenlit major action blockbusters had a male lead as the default. A woman with a gun in her hand was a niche commodity. Something for a niche audience. Time went by. The countryside began to change. Mad Max, Fury Road, 2015, Wonder Woman, 2017, Alita, Battle Angel, 20,192,019 Black Widow. 2021. These films proved what Colombiana was arguing back in 2011. A woman is not a concession to political correctness in an action movie. It is a commercially viable choice, artistically interesting and broad. Colombiana was not the first movie to send this message, but it was one of the building blocks that slowly built the new normal for the genre. After Colombiana, Zoe Saldana went on to build one of the most powerful careers of her generation. She became a fan favorite of the Marvel Universe in 2014, when she played the green-skinned warrior Gamora in the film Guardians of the Galaxy. Then came sequels to that franchise. James Cameron's much-anticipated sequel, Avatar, The Way of Water, came out in 2022, with Saldana reprising her role as Neytiri. The picture grossed over $2.3 billion worldwide. Zoe Saldana won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in 2025 for the film Emilia Perez. That was the peak of a career that began in the ballet studios of the Dominican Republic. Went through Neytiri's blue skin, Gamora's green skin, and the dark blood of Cattleya. Colombiana is in a peculiar position on this trajectory. It was the role where Saldana got to shoulder a film entirely on her own for the first time. No CGI, no sci-fi backdrops, no A-list co-stars, splitting screen time down the middle. Just her, the camera alone, only the story. Her delivery was not unnoticed by critics alone, but also by producers, who started offering her roles of vastly different scale and substance after Colombiana, who played young Cattleya, has carved out what many consider one of the most fascinating careers of her generation. After her Colombiana debut, she starred in The Hunger Games that came right on the heels of that. She starred in The Hate You Give, The Darkest Minds, and several other major projects. Colombiana will forever be the point of origin in her professional biography, the very role that started it all. And as for the attempts to make a sequel, in the film's biography, this saga writes its own chapter. Almost immediately after Colombiana was released, talk of a sequel began. Zoe Saldana has mentioned in a few interviews she'd be up to slip back into Cataleya's shoes. Colombiana 2 was part of a slate announced by EuropaCorp at the 2015 Cine Europe Expo in Barcelona. This was a real announcement at a real industry event. This is no lie, no guesswork. In 2017, news broke that Luc Besson was developing a prequel under the working title of Colombiana 2. The logic of a prequel rather than a sequel made sense. Cattleya walks away at the end of the first movie. Her tale is finished. It's tricky to move her narrative forward without creating artificial new conflicts. On the other hand, it was an organic storytelling course to get into the backstory of Uncle Emilio, to see how he became the man he is, and to elaborate on the first years of assassin training of Cattleya. There is, however, no officially confirmed sequel or prequel to Colombiana as of the end of the first quarter of 2026. The project popped up in news cycles a few times, then disappeared again. EuropaCorp has taken a serious financial and reputational beating in recent years, partly as a result of the legal troubles of its own Luc Besson. This really hampered the studio's ability to produce. Colombiana 2 was one of many projects that got stuck in development hell. The film's cultural imprint goes beyond the career trajectories of its cast. Colombiana made an impact on how Latin American characters are visualized in genre cinema. Before this film, Latin identity in Hollywood action films was almost always portrayed as a sign of threat or an exotic setting. Cartel leaders, goons, crooked officials, distressed immigrants. Colombiana had another choice. A Latin American woman at the head of the action. Not suffering, not landscape, not a prop, but the engine that drives the story. That's not to say the film solved the problem of representation in one fell swoop. The poor Colombia backlash is a reminder that stereotypes were still baked into the script. But the heading was correct. And this was precisely the trajectory later projects with Latin American actresses front and center picked up and expanded on. And we have to talk about how the film lives in the digital age. Colombiana left the theaters, went to home video, and finally ended up on streaming services. And that's where it really found its audience. Later, the theater found an audience who skipped the film in 2011, by yourself, late in the night, on a laptop or phone display. And arguably, this is the way that the film is best viewed. Its atmosphere, slow close-ups, and the silence between the shots call for an attentive gaze rather than a massive screen. Social media gave Colombiana a second youth. Zoe Saldana clips are almost a staple of best female action sequences compilations. Sometimes when talking about her origins, Amandla Stenberg will mention the movie. Those Saldana fans who discovered her via Avatar or Guardians of the Galaxy often go back to Colombiana as one of her important early solo efforts. And each time a new viewer discovers the film, the same debate is reawakened. A decent action movie or an overlooked gem? There is no end to the debate. There is no one right answer to that question. Colombiana is not quite a masterpiece in the strictest sense. There are some real script problems. It has editing problems. There are moments where logic is sacrificed for flash, but it also has Zoe Saldana, who carries the whole movie on her shoulders with such conviction and physical truth that it stands as an achievement in its own right. It has sequences that are pure cinema. It has a symbolic language that works with subtlety and precision. It tells a story which, despite its genre trappings, speaks to something real, and this is what matters in the end. A film that talks about something real is not going to die. It is still alive. Still, its beholder finds, keeps asking questions that everyone answers in their own way.